Global warming is no longer the future. It's right here, right now. The climate crisis has arrived, and we're running out of time to prevent a worst-case scenario for the future of the planet, which climate scientists describe as a global calamity. To meet the scale of this emergency, right now, representatives of countries all over the world are meeting in Paris to do something decisive about it. Sort of. The international negotiating process that has led to the current round of talks began in 1992 in Rio de Janeiro. There, 178 countries resolved to put limits on global greenhouse gas emissions. What those limits were for each of the countries that signed, however, was not specified. Next came Kyoto in 1997. In Kyoto, industrialized nations agreed to cut back on global emissions by 5.2% from 1990 levels by 2012. But when the U.S. delegation came home, the Senate wouldn't ratify the treaty. The U.S. is one of the world's biggest carbon emitters, and since the treaty required 55% of the world's polluters to sign on for it to take effect, the whole deal was basically scuttled. But then, in November 2004, Russia signed on to the deal, putting the treaty back into effect by bringing it past the 55% threshold. In 2007, in climate talks in Bali, the U.S. was finally dragged kicking and screaming into a commitment to cut global greenhouse gas emissions, though not with any mandatory targets. By then, though, it was already a decade into the 15 years that the treaty laid out for achieving its 5.2% cut in emissions. Finally, in Copenhagen in 2009, a consensus emerged. The world's national governments would prevent the planet's temperature from rising 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times, the threshold above which scientists believe the world would face extreme and irreparable harm. Countries submitted specific emissions reduction targets. Nevertheless, the Copenhagen meeting was widely considered a dismal failure because no progress was made toward a legally binding and enforceable treaty, just a non-binding aspirational accord. Marginal progress was made in the years that followed at meetings in Mexico, South Africa, Qatar, and Peru, including an extension of the Kyoto Protocol. But nothing realistically puts the world on track to meet its 2 degrees Celsius goal. Meanwhile, temperatures continue to rise. Scientists see the Paris conference as the world's last chance to prevent climate change from spiraling out of control and deliver on the goal to prevent a rise of more than 2 degrees. Fortunately, countries are coming into the Paris talks with a big hurdle already cleared. Emissions reduction targets are already set from the Copenhagen Accord. Unfortunately, these targets are nowhere near aggressive enough to prevent a 2 degrees Celsius rise. In fact, they may leave the world on course to a 3-degree rise or more. So whatever the international community agrees to in Paris, it won't be enough. That's why hundreds of thousands of people will be out in the streets around the globe, showing the world that a global citizens movement is arising to achieve what 23 years of climate negotiations have yet to accomplish.